In forgotten corners of Asia's countryside, where lanterns still flicker at the edge of rice fields, where graves are sealed with red thread, and where names are whispered but never spoken aloud, ancient rites still breathe in secret. This is folk fear, a place where tradition isn't just memory, but warning. Here, stories are not just told, they are remembered by the dead. Tonight, we return to a cursed village, bound by bloodline and betrayal, where a mirror was made from the bone ash of the forgotten, and a bride who was never meant to live is being called back to a wedding that never ended. Light a candle, close the doors, and don't look too long into the glass, because some reflections are not yours to see. This is the Bone Mirror of Yanshui, and once it forgets your face, it remembers your soul.
The road narrowed the closer she got to Yanshui. Lin Yiru sat stiff in the back seat of the long-distance bus, her gaze fixed on the window, though she saw nothing clearly. Just a blur of mist, trees, and the winding shadow of the river that had followed them since dawn. The land here was older. It breathed differently. The hills seemed to lean in with suspicion, and the fog clung to the surface of the fields like something alive. Outside, the last paved road gave way to dirt and gravel, and the driver muttered a prayer under his breath before slowing to a crawl. No one else was getting off here. Yi Ru clutched the worn black envelope in her lap, a telegram, of all things, from a village that hadn't changed since the 1800s. Your mother, Ling Su Yin, has passed. Funeral rites will be held on the 9th day of Ghost Month. Return home before sundown. She hadn't been called home in over 20 years. The village of Yanshui wasn't on any map she could find. It hadn't shown up on GPS. It didn't have cell reception. And yet, it waited, like it always had, still tucked between the river and the mountain, its rooftops barely visible through the veil of morning mist. When the bus finally stopped at the edge of a rotting signpost carved with faded red glyphs, the driver didn't look at her. You shouldn't stay long, he said, not unkindly. They don't like outsiders. I was born here, she replied quietly. He gave a single nod, eyes unreadable. That's worse. Then he drove off, the sound of the engine swallowed by trees and distance. Yi Ru stood alone, suitcase in hand, at the edge of a village time had tried to forget. The path to her childhood home had changed. The stone bridges were cracked, the wooden prayer arches slanted with age, and yellow talismans fluttered weakly from branches overhead. Rust-colored offerings floated in ceramic bowls along the riverbank. Red dates, salted fish, incense ash. Everything smelled of decay masked by jasmine and smoke. Villagers watched her from behind their doors. She heard them whispering through cracks in the wood, voices hushed, faces unseen. One old man at a well spat in her direction and turned away. She didn't expect warmth, but the air here carried something deeper, an absence, as if grief had settled not just in the people, but in the soil, the air, even the birds that didn't dare to sing. At the crest of the slope stood her mother's house. Yi Ru hadn't seen it since she was 8. The last time she and her mother had spoken was through a hospital phone call 15 years ago. Cold words, accusations on both sides, and then silence, sustained like a curse. Now the house loomed before her like a ghost summoned from memory. Slatted wood darkened by time, roof tiles sagging with moss. Paper lanterns lined the front gate, but their red had faded to a tired brown. A single white chrysanthemum rested on the door. White for mourning, red for the dead. She took a breath and stepped inside. The house greeted her with the scent of camphor and smoke. Candles burned low on the ancestral altar. Her mother's photo sat framed in a circle of yellow paper and joss sticks, expression stern even in death, her gaze still disapproving, still watching. On the table below the photo were offerings, steamed buns, chicken with unbroken skin, oranges split open, and a bowl of rice with black chopsticks planted upright, symbol of food for the dead, a silent call to spirits. No one else was there, no relatives, no priest, just her. She lit a stick of incense, knelt before the altar, and bowed 3 times. The silence was heavier than grief. It was the silence of unfinished things. When she finally stood, her gaze drifted across the room and froze. At the far corner, partially hidden behind a half-open cabinet, stood a tall, narrow mirror. She didn't remember it. Its frame was carved from charred wood, its edges etched with intricate Taoist symbols. The glass was cloudy, almost bruised, as though it had aged like skin. But it was not the mirror that chilled her. It was what she saw, or didn't see, within it. For a brief moment, she saw the room reflected, but not herself. Only the flickering candlelight, the altar, the shadow of the door, but not her. Then, just as quickly, her reflection reappeared, dim, warped, like seen through water. Her heart stilled. She blinked, stepped back. The glass stood still. She closed the cabinet door on the mirror. That night, Yi Ru lay on the old bed in her mother's room. The sheets smelled of mugwort and mildew. Outside, the air carried the distant sound of wooden clappers, pa, 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 and the faint gong of a funeral procession deeper in the valley. The house groaned like it remembered her. She clutched her mother's journal, found tucked under the altar drawer. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the entries were legible. Short, clipped sentences, rituals recorded, names of births and deaths, days of bad luck circled in red. On one page, a list. Ghost month, forbidden acts, no weddings, no moving houses, no swimming in the river, no looking into the bone mirror after sundown. Yi Ru frowned. Her mother had never mentioned such a thing. The entries continued, erratic, more paranoid toward the end. Yi Ru must never know. I made a mistake. I lied to the dead. It wants her now. A chill spread down Yi Ru's spine. The candle flickered. The mirror, shut behind the cabinet door, creaked. At midnight, she awoke to whispers. Not voices, breaths, close to her ear. The sound of someone weeping inside the walls. She sat up. The air had gone cold. Her phone had no signal. And beneath the door, the faintest line of red light pulsed like a heart. She rose, barefoot, and stepped into the hallway. The house was silent. The altar flames were extinguished, and the mirror cabinet stood open. The glass was black, reflecting nothing. Then, from its surface, a single bloody fingerprint smeared downward, as if from the inside. She ran. Outside, the village was darker than night. Only the river glowed faintly, lanterns drifting along its banks in silence. No sounds of frogs, no insects, just the gentle current and something gliding beneath it. Yiru stood at the edge, wind slicing through her. She thought of leaving, of never coming back, but something tethered her still. An absence in her memory, a question in her blood. She stared at the drifting lanterns. One of them stopped moving, then slowly turned, facing her. Its candle died. The first night in Yanshui had ended, and something had awakened in the mirror.
The next morning arrived without light. The fog outside had thickened, swallowing the treetops and muting the sun into a pale gray stain in the sky. Yiru woke to the sound of wind slipping through the warped walls of the house, high-pitched, like breath between cracked teeth. She sat up slowly, eyes heavy with unease. The scent of burnt wax lingered in the air. Her dream had been vivid, too vivid. A red veil fluttering in an unseen wind, a procession of brides with no mouths, and a man without a face, waiting beside a black river. The mirror, she remembered. She rose and walked barefoot down the hallway. The floorboards creaked in low protest. Her skin prickled as if the house itself disapproved of her movement. The cabinet door was still open. The mirror stood exposed in the cold morning light. It hadn't moved, and yet she felt it watching her. Yiru stepped closer. The frame was unlike anything she'd ever seen, carved with swirling patterns that resembled clouds and water, but also bones. Not painted bones, not etched, but tiny embedded fragments, almost fossil-like. The surface of the mirror itself was warped, not due to age, but design. Its reflection shimmered slightly, like a pool disturbed by a gentle breeze. And when she looked into it, her reflection blinked half a second too late. Her breath caught. She stepped back, then forward again. This time her reflection matched her movements perfectly, but her heart refused to slow. The unease curled inside her, slow and thick, like old incense smoke. She reached out and traced one finger down the cold surface. It didn't feel like glass. It felt like bone. She found the elder outside the temple that afternoon. He was sitting on a low wooden stool beneath a shrine wrapped in talismans, feeding incense sticks into a brazier without fire. His back was hunched, his mouth sunken, and his long gray eyebrows drooped like the wings of a dying moth. She bowed politely, unsure of the customs still honored here. "Elder Shen?" she asked. He did not look at her, but she knew he had heard. "My name is Lin Yiru. I'm Suyin's daughter." The incense in his hand snapped in half. A long silence followed. Then, hoarsely, he asked, "You stayed the night?" "Yes." He finally turned. His eyes were rheumy, yellowed, but sharp. "You saw the mirror?" Yiru hesitated. It was already in the house. "No," he shook his head slowly. "It was never just in the house." She waited, silent, willing him to go on. "The bone mirror is not a thing. It is a binding, a seal, a pact made with the dead so that the living may live. When your mother broke that pact, the mirror turned hungry." "Broke it? How?" He looked toward the hills where the river disappeared into mist. "Every daughter in your bloodline was promised to a groom who never drew breath, a ghost husband betrayed in death. The mirror seals the marriage,
It traps the soul, keeps it quiet. But your mother lied." Yiru's hands felt numb. "She told me nothing," she whispered. Elder Shen's voice was dry as ash. "And now you wear the veil whether you choose it or not." Yiru fled the temple. The words clung to her, dragging behind like funeral cloth. A ghost marriage, a pact made in secret, a sacrifice stolen. Her mother had been silent for years, guarded, distant, never speaking of Yanshui, never explaining why she cut them off from everyone, even as she lit incense every ghost month with trembling hands. Now she understood. She wasn't just here to mourn. She was here to be claimed. That night, she opened the journal again. There were more entries, older, dated just after her birth. The midwife said it was a bad sign, born during eclipse, during ghost month. They came with the contract, said it had been signed generations ago. They gave me the mirror and told me to follow the steps, but I couldn't. She was crying, alive. I couldn't let her go. I used the other child. Yiru's breath caught in her throat. The other child? She flipped the page. There was nothing. Only a red fingerprint pressed into the paper, smudged as if someone had tried to wipe it clean. She dropped the journal and stepped back. The lights in the house flickered. The mirror creaked behind her. She turned. It was open again. The mirror surface had changed. It no longer showed her face. It showed the altar, but not as it was. The offerings were fresh, the candles high. Her mother kneeled before it, younger, hair ungrayed, her hands trembling as she lit incense. Then a tiny bundled figure was placed on the table, a swaddled child, pale, unmoving. Blood was drawn on paper, names written. Yiru reached out to touch the glass and felt heat. The mirror was warm, almost beating. Suddenly, the figure in the reflection, the infant, twitched. Its head turned slowly toward her. Its eyes were black pits. It opened its mouth and screamed, but no sound came. The candles in the altar room flared and died. Yiru stumbled back, crashing into the floor. The mirror went black. In the darkness, she heard footsteps, not hers, not real, but steady, measured, slow. They came from the hallway, from the mirror, from inside the walls. And then a voice, rasping, cracked, male, whispering from just beyond the door. "You were promised to me." She covered her ears, but the mirror laughed. The next day, the villagers would not speak to her. Women turned away, children ran, doors shut before she knocked. Only a single paper was slipped beneath her door that night, a folded sheet of spirit money, inked with trembling calligraphy. It read, "Leave before the 7th night, or marry the river." On the 5th day, she awoke to find hair on her pillow, not hers. Thick, coarse, black strands, knotted with red thread. She opened the door and found a small porcelain bowl on the ground, filled with water and red blossoms. Floating in it was a miniature paper effigy, a bride in crimson, head bowed, arms stitched with blood. She dumped the bowl. The mirror wept. Drops of red leaked down the glass that night. By the 6th day, she no longer saw her reflection at all. Where her face should be, the mirror showed only a veil, crimson silk, billowing in water. Hands reached for her from the darkness, mouths whispering her name in the dialect of the dead. She covered the mirror with a cloth. But cloth did not stop dreams. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face again, not as it was in life, but as it was in guilt. And behind her, the groom waited.
The wetlands whispered at night. Lin Yiru stood at the edge of the riverbank, where the earth turned soft beneath her feet and the air smelled of old mud and forgotten incense. The sky above Yanshui was dark, not from clouds, but from something heavier, something that pressed against the stars and made even the moon seem uncertain. She hadn't meant to leave the house after sunset, but the mirror had changed again. It happened just past dusk. She had gone to relight the altar candles, hoping ritual might bring comfort, or at least delay the inevitable. But the moment she stepped into the room, she froze. The cloth she draped over the mirror was gone. Not removed, not folded, gone as if it had burned away in silence. And in its place, a new reflection. The room behind her was empty, but a bride stood in front of the mirror. Her back was to the glass, her hair long and black, soaked to the ends. Her red veil was torn and dripping, as though it had just been pulled from water. She stood motionless, head bowed, hands limp at her sides. Yiru blinked. The reflection did not change. Slowly, the bride lifted one hand. Her index finger curled and beckoned. Once. Twice. Then she vanished. The mirror turned black. That's when Yiru ran. Now she stood at the water's edge, trying to catch her breath. The river that wound through Yanshui was calm, but too calm. Its surface flat like a mirror, the current unnaturally still. Lanterns bobbed in silence along the water, flickering dimly in red and gold. She remembered these from childhood. Hungry ghost offerings meant to guide the dead back to the underworld. But they felt wrong now, like they were waiting for her instead. A wind moved across the surface. The lanterns turned in unison, facing the shore, facing her. Then, from somewhere deeper in the fog, came the unmistakable sound of drums. Tapong, the funeral drums of old. Low, hollow, beating from beneath the water. Yiru stepped back instinctively, her heels sinking into wet moss. Her breath caught, every hair on her arms rose. From the reeds to her left, something moved. A figure, white-robed, hunched. She turned slowly, heart pounding, and saw an old woman rising from the tall grass. Eyes milk-blind, skin like dried paper, mouth red with betel nut. She held a bowl of ashes and lotus stems, soaked in something dark. "You shouldn't be here," the woman rasped. Yiru struggled for words. I didn't mean to." The woman shoved the bowl toward her. "Take it." She hesitated. "What is it?" "Atonement." She stared into the bowl. The lotus had teeth, or what looked like them. Tiny white fragments floated between the petals, pieces of bone. "I'm not doing any ritual," Yiru said. The woman shook her head. "You already did, the day you were born." Then she turned and melted into the reeds, the fog swallowing her whole. Behind Yiru, the river stirred. She looked back.
The lanterns had begun to sink, one by one. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the altar with every candle lit, surrounding herself in rings of flame like talismans. The journal lay open in her lap. She began rereading entries, looking for meaning, anything that might explain what she saw at the river. But most pages now were missing, cleanly torn. Only the inked impressions remained, like ghosts of words that once were. She noticed something else, too. New writing. A line had appeared at the bottom of the last page, not written in her mother's hand, carved lightly in red. "You should have stayed dead, little bride." She dropped the book. The mirror groaned in the corner. Not creaked, groaned, like something exhaling after holding its breath too long. She turned slowly. The mirror had cracked. A long, jagged split down the center, but not randomly. No, the crack had shape. It curved, it split, it formed a smile, and just beneath it, the faint outline of a face. Yuru woke the next morning on the floor, surrounded by extinguished candles. There was dirt under her fingernails, her palms were stained black, and the soles of her feet were wet. She checked the door. It was locked, the windows shut, but outside her room, muddy footprints marked the hallway floor. Not just one set, two. Later that day, she forced herself to return to the village square. It was market day, if you could call it that. Just a few old women laying out dried herbs and paper charms. They stopped when they saw her. Eyes narrowed, mouths pursed. She approached a stall of spirit offerings, paper money, miniature red shoes, wax brides. The seller, a man with a bent back and a prayer bead bracelet, refused to meet her gaze. "Do you sell mirrors?" she asked. He grunted, "Not that kind." She leaned in. "Do you know what it is? The one in my house?" His hand trembled slightly. He spit to the side. "We don't speak of it." "Why?" "Because we remember." He finally looked at her. His pupils were pinpricks. "Your grandfather brought the first mirror here, said it could bind a spirit to a bride, and in return the fields would never flood. It worked, for a while." Yiru's throat tightened. "And then?" One bride refused. She clawed her own eyes out before the wedding. Her reflection stayed in the mirror. She didn't. And she's not the only one still inside. That night, the mirror called her name. Not in sound, but in memory. Visions pulled her under like sleep. She stood as a child in the same altar room, watching her mother cry, watching her burn paper effigies, watching her whisper to the mirror, "Please forgive me." She saw herself, 8 years old, accidentally opening the cabinet door, her mother slamming it shut, screaming in dialect, her palm striking Yiru's face, blood from her ring drawing a line across Yiru's cheek. Then a voice from the mirror. "Blood remembers. The veil remembers." She woke screaming, and the mirror laughed again. On the 7th day, the sky turned red at noon. No one in the village left their homes. Not even the dogs barked. And outside Yiru's door, a folded piece of red silk waited. It was a bridal veil, wet, still dripping. The veil was still wet. Lin Yiru stared at it, unmoving. Crimson silk, soaked through, lay folded at her doorstep like an offering. The drops that fell from its hem were thick, not water, not rain. Ink? No, too dark. She didn't want to know, but she reached for it anyway. The moment her fingers brushed the fabric, a sharp sting shot through her skin. She gasped, pulling back. A line of blood bloomed along her palm, thin and precise, as though cut by paper. The veil hadn't just been left for her, it had claimed her. She turned the silk over slowly and froze. Embroidered into the underside, nearly invisible, was her name. Not Yi Ru, her birth name, the name only her mother used, the name no one else should have known. Lin Yi Shu. She ran, down the hallway, through the village, past staring faces and shuttered doors, straight to the shrine outside the temple where she had last seen Elder Shen. The brazier was cold, but the smell of burnt rice and wax still lingered. Yi Ru didn't wait. She threw open the temple door. Inside, candles flickered weakly, their flames long and low. Statues of forgotten gods loomed in the haze, faces obscured by offerings of incense ash and faded gold leaf. And in the center, seated cross-legged in front of a sealed clay urn, was Elder Shen. His eyes opened before she spoke. "They left me a veil," she said breathlessly. He nodded slowly. "Then the claiming has begun. I want answers, now, no more riddles." He exhaled a long, dry breath, as if breathing meant remembering. "Your mother broke a pact your family made 100 years ago, a pact to protect the bloodline by sacrificing it." He gestured toward the urn behind him. "That urn holds the ashes of the first ghost groom." Yi Ru's blood ran cold. "Ghost groom?" He met her gaze. "Here we believe that the restless dead need company, that if a man dies before he marries, his soul wanders, lonely and bitter. So we wed him to the living, to bind his spirit, to calm the river, to keep the crops alive." Yi Ru whispered, "A ghost marriage?" "Yes, always performed on the 7th night of Ghost Month, always with a willing girl, and always with the mirror as the altar." He stood, slowly. "In your family, every firstborn daughter was given. Your great-grandmother, your grandmother, your mother." He paused. "She was meant to give you." Yi Ru staggered back. "No," she said. "She didn't—" "She refused," he said, voice sharper now. "She hid you, lied to the spirits, substituted a stillborn twin wrapped in bridal silk, and sealed the ritual with fake blood. She broke the mirror's balance." Yi Ru's breath caught. "Stillborn twin?" The memory came suddenly, blurry but real. A photograph she once found in a locked drawer, showing her as a baby next to a cradle, an empty one. Her mother had snatched it away before she could ask. "She never told me." "She couldn't," he said, "because once the pact is broken, the debt remains. The mirror doesn't forget, it waits." He turned back to the urn. "And now it remembers you." Yi Ru walked home in silence. The village was too still. She could feel it watching her. Every house, every shrine, every drowned root beneath the soil. Even the river seemed to murmur her name as it passed. She had been born cursed, promised to a spirit before she drew breath. Her mother had tried to save her, but the price had not been paid. Now it came due. That night, she opened the journal again. This time, she found a hidden pocket in the back cover, sealed with wax and lined with dried petals. Inside was a letter, unfinished, her mother's handwriting, jagged and uneven. Shoo, if you're reading this, then I failed to keep the mirror quiet. I'm sorry. I thought I could hide you from it. I thought one lie could be enough. You had a twin, a girl born cold. I used her body for the offering. I dressed her in silk. I painted her face. I told them it was done. But I never lit the final candle. I never let the mirror drink your name. And now it remembers you. You must not marry it. You must not complete the rite. If you do, he will never let you go. Burn the mirror if you can, but not without the ashes. Only the truth can sever the vow. I loved you, Shu, enough to lie to the dead. The letter ended there. No signature, no final instruction, only a faint thumbprint in dried blood. She lit incense at the altar. She knelt before her mother's photo, the one in the mourning circle, and bowed 3 times. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know what you gave up. Outside the wind rose, the window shutters banged open, and in the mirror, the bride returned. This time, she faced the glass. Her veil had been lifted, and Yi Ru saw her face. It was her own. She screamed. The candles flared, then blew out. The room filled with shadows. From the mirror came footsteps, then a second reflection. A figure taller than her, standing behind the bride. A groom, but his face was blank, white, smooth like wet clay. Only the mouth was carved, stretched in a smile that split to the ears. He lifted his hand and slid a red wedding band onto the bride's finger. Yi Ru's breath vanished from her lungs. On her own hand, the same ring appeared. She ran again, out of the house, down to the river. But the river had risen. The banks were flooding, even though there had been no rain. The lanterns floated closer than before. Their flames turned blue, and in the center of the current, a bridal raft bobbed silently, decorated with red paper, bones tied with thread, and a chair awaiting its bride. It waited for her, and she could feel him watching, waiting, smiling. By morning, her face had faded from every mirror. Even her phone screen showed only fog. She was becoming the bride again. The spirit's patience had ended. There were 3 nights left. The mirror had begun to whisper, not in words, but in reminders. Her fingers now bore faint red stains that wouldn't wash away. Her eyes stung in candlelight, and each morning she awoke with her pillow slightly damp, as though something had leaned over her in the night, dripping. The ring still clung to her finger, red jade, fitted perfectly. She hadn't put it on, but it never came off. On the 8th day, Yiru went searching for the only person who might know more, the old Taoist sorcerer who had once made the mirror. She had no name, only a memory. Her mother once muttering of a man who bound spirit to surface, soul to silver, a craftsman of seals, a binder of ghosts. The village refused to help, but Elder Shen finally relented. He gave her a name, etched in ink on the back of a spirit tablet, Master Gao, and directions to a crumbling shrine beyond the rice fields. Do not speak your real name there, not even in your thoughts." "Why?" she asked. "Because that mirror isn't the only thing that listens." The shrine was barely more than ruin. Half swallowed by trees and overgrowth, its wooden beams were blackened with moss, and the stone lions at the entrance had no eyes, only smooth sockets where carvings had been scraped clean. She stepped through the threshold, and the air changed. It became colder, thicker, as though every breath had to be paid for. Inside, she found him. Seated before an altar of bone and ash, surrounded by cages of paper birds and ink-soaked scrolls, sat Master Gao. Not old, not young. His face was ageless, skin stretched too tight, lips pale from beetle root. His eyes were fully white, yet he saw. "You carry the mirror's scent," he said, without looking at her. Yuru's voice wavered. You made it?" He corrected. "I forged its vessel. The soul was bound by another." She stepped closer. It's taken my reflection. It's showing me things that never happened, or haven't yet. I don't know what's real anymore." He did not respond, only reached to a wooden box beside him and removed something wrapped in black silk. He unfolded it slowly. Inside lay a fragment of a mirror, but this one was red, streaked with lines like veins. And inside it, though the surface was still, a tiny open eye blinked once and then vanished. Yuru stepped back. "What is that?" He smiled thinly. "One of many. Mirrors are not for seeing, they are for remembering and for keeping things where they belong." She swallowed hard. The bone mirror. Why was it made? Gao stood, bones cracking as he moved. "During the great flooding, when this land drowned once every 7 years, the ancestors begged the river to sleep. The river answered with a price, a bride for the drowned, a companion for the spirit who ruled beneath." He moved to a cabinet and pulled out an ancient scroll, unfolding it onto the floor. It showed a diagram of a ritual circle. At the center, a mirror carved from human bone and polished with ancestor ash. "The mirror is not glass, it is memory. It is flesh repurposed. It binds the spirit groom to the bride and binds her in return." Yuruth trembled. "And the bloodline?" "Each generation owes a bride," he said simply. "You were born into that debt." She stepped outside the shrine, the weight of the truth pressing into her skull. The mirror was not haunted, it was the haunting itself. It wasn't cursed, it was fed with names, with offerings, with lies. She stared at her palm where the ring still pulsed faintly red. The wind moved across the rice fields in waves, like breathing. Somewhere beneath the earth, something stirred. That night she returned to her mother's house and tore through every drawer, every locked cabinet, searching. She found it hidden beneath the floorboards of the old bedroom, a cloth-wrapped bundle tied with red string. Inside, a small ceramic urn and a brittle, yellowed envelope. She opened the urn first. Ash, fine and gray, still warm somehow. And buried deep in the ash, a tooth, tiny, human. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Instead, she opened the envelope. It was her mother's final confession. I buried her beneath the altar, the stillborn twin. I told them it was you. I told the mirror your name, but I never believed it would know the difference. Now I do. Forgive me. If you found this, it means the mirror has cracked. That means he is coming through. You must finish what I could not. Burn the mirror, but not with fire. Burn it with truth. You'll need the ashes and your real name. He'll resist. He'll offer memory. He'll offer love. He will sound like me. Don't believe him. He only wants your soul. At that moment, the mirror in the other room shattered. Not broke, shattered in reverse. Yuru watched, frozen, as the cloth she draped across it peeled away into the air like skin, and the mirror reassembled itself, crack by crack, shard by shard, until it was whole again. And in its surface, the altar room was no longer her own. It was dressed for a wedding. Her own body was in the chair, dressed in red, face hidden by a veil. She moved without moving. She whispered without breath. And beside her, the faceless groom turned and smiled. That night, the mirror did not laugh. It spoke, in her mother's voice. "Yushu, come back inside, it's cold out here." Yuru sat in the kitchen, gripping the urn in shaking hands. "Did you read my letter? Did you see the veil? I saved it for you. It's yours." She closed her eyes. "Don't you miss me?" She stood and faced the mirror. Her reflection was gone again, replaced with a younger version of herself sitting at the table, drawing in a notebook. Her mother smiled beside her. Everything was warm, golden, quiet. "You can have it again," the voice whispered. "You just have to say yes." But the warmth faded. The girl in the reflection looked up, and her eyes were black pits. The room behind her melted into bone and blood, and the groom took her hand. Yuru screamed and hurled the urn at the mirror. The ash burst into the air. The mirror flared white. The reflection burned. She fell to her knees, coughing, choking on the smoke of the dead. And in the flickering flame of a fallen candle, she saw something inside the mirror writhing, as if trying to crawl out. It wasn't done, but it was hurt. The mirror was bound, but not broken, not yet. There were 2 nights left, and the wedding had already begun.
The air inside the house had changed. It no longer smelled of mildew or incense, of rotting wood or ash. Now it smelled like wet silk, like the inside of a bridal chest sealed too long, the scent of red cloth steeped in river water, something floral and funereal clinging to the throat like regret. Yiru stood at the altar, staring at the photograph of her mother. It had changed. The face was the same, but the eyes were gone. Not scratched, not smudged, simply absent. 2 empty sockets, black and deep, as if whatever spirit had entered the mirror had also begun feeding from the world around it. She turned slowly. The mirror in the far corner stood uncovered. It no longer needed to hide. It was no longer just a mirror. It pulsed faintly in the dark, like an eye that had learned to blink. Its surface was no longer reflective, but murky, like deep water on a moonless night,
and from its depths something stirred, then rose. Yiru's breath caught. A silhouette emerged, not within the glass, but beneath it, like a man pressing up from under a frozen lake. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure floated slowly upward until it was face to face with her, yet still inside the mirror. Its form was draped in ancient ceremonial robes, the kind worn by noblemen of the Qing dynasty, sleeves long and crimson, embroidered with silver thread. The hands were pale and jointless, like they had never belonged to a man. And where a face should have been, there was only a blank canvas of flesh. No eyes, no mouth, only the impression of a face, like someone had forgotten to finish carving. But it moved. Its head tilted, it leaned forward, and it breathed. The mirror fogged from the inside. That night, Yiru's dreams bled into waking. She dreamed she was walking through Yanshui, but the streets were underwater. Lanterns floated above her like stars fallen from the sky. The villagers stood along the banks, unmoving. Their mouths shone shut with red thread. She passed them all until she came to a wedding procession in reverse. No drums, no firecrackers, only silence. And at the center, on a raft made of bones and bridal chairs, sat the groom without a face, waiting, holding out his hand. He said, "Come back," though his mouth did not move. His voice was her own. She woke with blood in her mouth. By morning, the altar room had changed. Red silk covered the walls. Incense sticks had burned themselves into the floor, and a new photograph had been added to the altar beside her mother's. It was her, but not the person she was now. The girl in the photo wore a red bridal robe. Her eyes were downcast, her mouth stitched shut, with a faint red line drawn across it, and her reflection was missing. She searched the village in desperation. Every house was closed to her, every face turned away. Only one door remained open, the midwife's, a crone who hadn't spoken since Yiru arrived, but now she stood at the edge of her threshold, watching, waiting. "You were born with two shadows," the woman said, voice brittle as old paper. One cried, the other didn't. Yiru's hand trembled. "My twin," the woman nodded. "She was born cold, but not still. She died before the mirror saw her. The spirit refused. The offering was flawed." Yiru swallowed hard. "Then why did it wait this long?" "Because he was patient. But now, the seventh cycle has returned. The flood is near, and the mirror has tasted your soul." She reached into her robe and pulled out a shard of glass wrapped in red gauze. "Take this." Yiru accepted it carefully. It was a piece of the mirror, from an older one perhaps, its surface blackened, edges worn smooth by time. "Why give this to me?" "Because there's only one way to destroy a mirror like that," the woman whispered. "You show it what it doesn't want to see." That night, Yiru's voice again, calling her from the mirror. But this time, it was joined by others, voices overlapping, blending, too many to name. They spoke in dialects she didn't understand, whispers layered like threads of fabric woven too tightly to unravel. And beneath them all was his voice, deeper, slower, and infinitely colder. "You are already mine." Yiru turned. The groom was in the mirror again, but now he had eyes, not human, her eyes. She tried to run, but the hallway stretched. The floor turned soft beneath her feet, like river mud. The walls breathed, and the mirror followed. Every surface now showed a reflection, not of reality, but of the spirit world. Dead lanterns floated in the windows. Blood ran upward across the ceiling. The altar bled. And at the end of the corridor, a doorway of red silk waited. She stepped through. She was no longer in the house. She was standing in the center of the village, but it was empty. No people, no animals, no wind, just paper. Hundreds of paper brides hung from trees by red thread, their faces blank, each one twisted slowly in the still air, and all of them wore a name. Her name. Yiru tore one down, then another. The moment she touched the third, all the others caught fire. The sky turned black, and in the reflection of a pool beneath her feet, she saw the groom now walking behind her. Closer, closer, until she turned, and there was only the mirror again, standing in the field where the temple once stood. It showed her face, then took it. She awoke the next morning with no memory of how she got back to the house. The mirror was covered again, this time by itself, as though ashamed. And on the floor beneath it, written in ash, "One night left." Lin Yiru no longer slept. Each time her eyes closed, she found herself drifting in the in-between, the space beneath reflections, where memories were not her own and time moved backward. The groom stood there, always waiting, always watching. But now, something had changed. She was starting to forget, not just dreams, memories, names, faces, her childhood in the city, her first apartment, the taste of coffee, the warmth of summer, all of it fading. She'd begun to say her name out loud in the mornings, just to anchor herself. "I'm Lin Yiru," she whispered to the mirror that no longer answered. "I'm not yours." But the ring remained on her finger, and the house answered in silence. She made a decision that morning. She would fight this, not with ritual, not with offerings, but with logic. The world had changed. Spirits did not bind the living anymore. Superstition had no hold over her unless she allowed it to. This village, this mirror, they were remnants of fear passed down like heirlooms. She was not afraid anymore. So she gathered the pieces. She broke the altar's candlestands. She smashed the offering bowls, crushed the joss sticks under her heel. Then she turned to the mirror. She dragged it outside. It didn't resist. In the courtyard, she built a fire, doused it in oil. She lifted the mirror above her head, arms trembling, legs shaking, and she threw it into the flames. It landed with a crack that echoed like bone hitting stone. The fire roared. Smoke poured upward in dark, writhing shapes. She stepped back. For the first time in days, she breathed. But then, the smoke stilled. It no longer rose. It collapsed inward, sucked into the heart of the flames, into the mirror. The fire shrank, died, gone in seconds. And from the ashes, the mirror stood whole again, unburned, untouched. Its surface rippled, then smoothed, and now it showed her reflection, but smiling. She wasn't. That night, the punishment began. It started with the animals. Crows dropped from the sky at dusk, their wings twisted backward. Dogs howled all night, then fell silent. She awoke to find a dead pig's head on the doorstep, its eyes sewn shut, its mouth filled with river stones. And above the door, someone had painted in thick, dark strokes, "You denied him. He denies you." She fled to the temple, but Elder Shen was gone. The shrine was in ruin, burned down in the night. Ashes still smoldered at the edges, and beneath them she found a scorched offering bowl filled with teeth. In the distance, the river had begun to rise. Lanterns floated upstream now, backward, against the current. Desperate, Yiru returned to the midwife's house. The woman opened the door halfway, eyes wild. "I tried to burn it. It didn't work." The woman stared at her, then spat into the dust. "You don't burn a god's mouth. You feed it what it wants." "What does it want?" she asked. "You." She stumbled home, body aching, mind unraveling. The mirror was no longer confined to the altar room. It moved. Now it waited in the hallway, then the kitchen, then her bedroom. Its surface remained dark, but she could feel it watching. And worse, it was listening. Every thought, every breath echoed faintly against the glass. It was inside her now. That night, the house grew colder. The windows wouldn't open. The lights flickered until they died. And in the pitch black, Yiru lit a single candle. She held the shard of the old mirror the midwife had given her. Its surface trembled in her hand, as if afraid. She held it to the larger mirror and whispered, "Show me what you don't want me to see." Nothing happened at first. Then, light. The bone mirror flared. For one blinding second, it showed everything, not just Yiru, but all the brides before her, her mother, her grandmother, girls in red, faces hidden, each one kneeling, each one bound, and the groom, faceless, waiting. But behind him, deeper in the mirror's depths, something older stirred. A shape, a mouth made of ruin, a voice that whispered not to her ears, but directly into her blood. "You were never meant to live. You were borrowed breath, a stolen soul. Give yourself back." She dropped the shard. It shattered, and the mirror began to crack again from the inside out. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The altar candles lit themselves. The walls wept water. And from the hallway came the sound of drums. Not loud, just steady. Tapon, tapon, tapon. She knew the sound. It meant the groom had begun his journey. The procession had started, and there were only 2 nights left before the wedding. At dawn, she opened the last drawer of her mother's dresser. Inside was a bridal comb, still red, still warm, and beneath it, written in soot on the wood, "You can't run. You were born in the mirror." On the 9th night, the drums returned, not from the temple, not from the hills, from beneath the house, low and hollow, like fists beating on coffins. The rhythm was slow, ritualistic, the kind used to accompany bridal processions for the dead. Lin Yiru lay still, heart pounding. The mirror no longer needed her reflection. It now used her name, carved into door frames, etched into water bowls, whispered in wind. It lived in everything. She rose from bed, Not because she wanted to, because something had called her. The village was waiting. She stepped into the night barefoot. No one spoke, but they moved. Each house released a figure dressed in mourning white or ceremonial red, faces veiled, eyes downcast, hands carrying offerings of paper brides, chicken heads, and joss effigies. The old rites had begun, and Yiru was the center. She wanted to turn back, but her feet refused. The path through the village was lit by funeral lanterns, small red orbs swaying in absolute silence. No wind, no insects, only the steady beat of unseen drums. No one touched her, but they followed. She was led to the old ceremonial ground by the river, a stone platform worn by time, hidden beneath vines and offerings. There, a wedding altar had been rebuilt, new, clean, prepared. 2 chairs sat side by side, carved from sandalwood blackened by ash. One held a red bridal veil folded neatly, the other empty. Yiru stepped forward, then stopped. The villagers parted without instruction, and from between them 2 brides emerged, identical, dressed in red, veils pulled low. But as they neared the altar, Yiru gasped, because one of them was her. The walk, the posture, the hair, and the second, smaller, thinner, paler, the dead twin. A child that had never cried, still dressed in silk, eyes painted shut. The ritual was not metaphor, it was memory reenacted. The mirror was there, standing upright behind the altar, lit from within. It reflected not the living, but the wedding that never happened. A ghost groom stood in the glass, facing 2 veiled brides, one pulsing with breath, the other cold with silence. The villagers began to chant. The air grew heavy. Yiru screamed. She tore the veil from the chair, rushed forward, shouted her name. "I am not your bride! I am not the offering!" The crowd didn't stop. They didn't flinch. Their mouths moved, but their eyes were all gone, black holes like the altar photos. They were not present. They were possessed. She grabbed the child bride's hand. It was cold, but it pulsed, faintly, as if some part of the girl had survived in ritual. She shook her. "You weren't meant to carry this." The mirror flickered. The image glitched. The groom tilted his head, and for the first time, he stepped forward, out of the mirror, onto the stone. His body didn't move like flesh. It flowed like cloth soaked in ink, trailing wet footsteps behind him. His arms were too long. His mouth began to take shape, slowly, painfully, like a scream folding inward. Yiru screamed back. Then a hand grabbed her wrist. The midwife. She pulled her backward, hard, just as the groom reached forward. The villagers collapsed. Lanterns burst in sparks. The mirror cracked again. But the groom only paused. He wasn't banished, only delayed. And Yiru knew now. The wedding hadn't failed years ago. It had been postponed. And tonight, it was finally rescheduled. The midwife dragged her through the reeds back toward the shrine. "You saw it," she said between breaths. Yiru nodded, trembling. "He's real." "He always was, but now you've witnessed the wedding. That means your body is recognized." "What does that mean?" "It means if you die now," she whispered, "you'll go straight to him." Back at the house, the mirror was no longer in the altar room. It was in her bedroom, waiting beside the bed. A bridal robe hung next to it, blood-soaked, still dripping. And inside the pockets, coins, the kind placed on corpses' eyes. She fell to her knees, shaking. She opened her mother's journal one last time. The final page had changed. I told them no. I lied. I stole your life from the dead. But it was never just you who had to pay. He is not just a groom. He is the debt itself. He will marry the bloodline until none remain. Outside, the drums resumed, but now they came from within the trees, not below, not above, surrounding. And Yiru heard the river whisper her name again. Only one night remained. One final offering awaited. And this time, there would be no substitutions.
The mirror no longer reflected anything. Not her, not the room. Only the wedding altar, rebuilt again in its surface, waiting. Yiru didn't look at it anymore. She didn't speak her name. She barely blinked. She was running out of time. Only one night remained, and she had only one chance left. The bone mirror couldn't be burned. It couldn't be buried. But there was a story, something Elder Shen once muttered beneath his breath during a fever dream. A man in the mountains, a Taoist who broke a bride's reflection and lived. A heretic, a ghost breaker, a mirror thief. Yiru left before dawn. The mountain path was overgrown, nearly swallowed by ferns and vines. She climbed for hours, lungs burning, the veil between her and the world thinning like damp cloth. Her ring tightened with every step, her vision blurred. Once she nearly collapsed from a sudden surge of vertigo, like something pulling her backward. But she pressed on, because she could feel the mirror awakening behind her. By the time she reached the top, the air was electric. And there, nestled in a grove of dead pine, stood a crumbling Taoist shrine. Moss-eaten, doorless, the paint long stripped from its dragons. But smoke drifted from within. She stepped inside. He sat cross-legged by a brazier of bones and broken tiles. Old, unshaven, dressed in yellow robes stained by ash and memory. He did not look up when she entered, but he spoke her name. Yukshu. She froze. How? I saw your reflection before you were born. She stepped forward slowly. You know the mirror. I bound it once, long ago, before your mother's mother ever bled. I was the first to craft its seal, the first to regret it. He looked up. His eyes were mirror silver, reflective, empty. You want to break it, but you don't yet know what that means. I don't care. Tell me how. He reached into the fire and pulled out a shard of scorched glass, holding it with bare hands, unburned. The bone mirror is not glass. It is memory woven into bone and sealed with blood. It does not trap reflections. It feeds on promises, broken ones most of all. He held up the shard. It pulsed red. Every time someone says no to a ritual they were born into, it hungers more. Yuru's voice shook. Then how do I stop it? There are only two ways, the Taoist said. Marry it,
and die a peaceful death in its arms, or break the bond. How? He paused. By offering it the one thing it cannot reflect. She stared. What? He leaned forward. A soul that chooses to be forgotten. The words sank like stones. Yiru understood what he meant. The bone mirror didn't kill. It preserved. It took identities, names, faces, trapped them in memory forever. To break it, she would have to give it everything about herself and let it die with her. No, she whispered. There must be another way. The Taoist closed his eyes. There always is, but it costs more. What? You'll need 3 things. He raised a trembling finger. 1, the ashes of the false bride, your twin, the one they offered in your place. Already have them. 2, the mirror shard of your lineage, a fragment from the first binding. She showed him the blackened piece the midwife had given her. He nodded. Good. And 3rd, he stood, walked to the far corner, and returned holding a small clay jar bound in red twine. You must pour your own blood into the mirror at the hour you were born, while reciting your name. And then, he hesitated, you must choose what reflection stays behind. She frowned. What does that mean? Only one version of you will survive, the mirror or the one in your skin. Yiru left the mountain in silence. She carried the jar in her bag, the shard in her pocket, the ashes of her sister at her heart. The sky above Yanshui was turning black, and when she returned to the village, everyone was gone. No voices, no footsteps, no wind, just mirrors. Hung from doors, trees, walls. Every surface reflected her, but with subtle differences. In one, her eyes were weeping blood. In another, she wore the veil. In another still, she had no face at all. And in the center of the square, where the well once stood, the real mirror awaited. The bone mirror, whole again, standing taller than before. Its surface shimmered, open like a doorway. And inside, the wedding was ready. The groom stood at the altar, waiting. Yiru stepped forward, and the wind returned. The lanterns lit, the village exhaled, and the drums began one final time. Tapon, tapon, tapon. It was time. But this time, she wasn't the offering. She was the one holding the knife.
Time no longer moved forward, not in Yanshui. The sun rose, but no light followed. The clocks ticked, but all pointed to midnight. The candle flames drifted backward, curling into their wicks instead of outward. Even the birds had stopped singing, as if silence had replaced the seasons. And inside the altar room, Lin Yiru sat cross-legged in front of the bone mirror, waiting, watching, whispering her name over and over again. I am Lin Yiru. I am Lin Yushu. I am not yours. But each time she said it, the name felt thinner, like paper soaked through, like a thread pulled from the hem of her soul. The mirror now showed rooms that didn't exist. A hospital hallway, a child's bedroom with no door,
a riverbank filled with headless brides. Yihru turned away each time, but the reflections followed. Worse, sometimes when she blinked, she'd find herself inside the mirror. Not her body, not her mind, just the sensation of standing still and watching the real world fade. She marked the wall beside her with chalk, one line for each hour, but the marks disappeared when she turned around. She began forgetting basic things: her mother's voice, the smell of rain, the shape of her own handwriting. She caught herself calling the mirror home. The ritual had to happen at the hour of her birth, but she could no longer remember when that was. The hospital that had delivered her was gone, the documents lost. Her mother's journal had been burned in the fire she didn't remember starting. She was running out of self, and the mirror knew it. On the second night, the mirror began to mimic her, not just in reflection, but in behavior. When she stepped into the hallway, her reflection didn't follow. It stayed in the glass, blinking at a slower rhythm, smiling just a little longer, standing a little too still, until one night it began moving on its own. She entered the altar room and found herself already inside, seated calmly, in her clothes, holding the urn of her twin. The mirror version of her looked up and said, "I'm the one that belongs here." She backed away, trembling. "You're not real." "I'm more real than what's left of you," it said. "I remember things you've already forgotten." It reached out, held up a photograph of Yihru as a child, then ripped it in half. And when it did, Yihru forgot what her first memory was. She locked the mirror in the back room, but the next morning, it was in the hallway again, waiting, always waiting. She tried to leave Yanshui, packed a bag, walked down the road toward the bus stop, clutching the Taoist's instructions in one hand and the ash urn in the other. But the road never ended. Each time she passed the bamboo grove, it reset. The trees stood the same. The wind blew in reverse. She turned around, and the village was behind her again. She hadn't moved at all. The world now folded through the mirror, and she was its hinge. On the third night, the groom returned, but this time he wore her face. He stood in the reflection, dressed in her robe, long hair loose around her shoulders, smiling her smile, tilting her head. But when he blinked, his eyes were pure mirror. He lifted one hand to the glass, held up a bridle comb, pressed it gently to the surface, and whispered, "Choose. Which version of you gets to leave?" She screamed, shattered the nearest mirror, but the reflection laughed from the shards. The Taoist had warned her. The mirror does not want to lose you, so it will offer you versions of yourself that feel more beautiful, more whole, more worthy of memory. You must resist. You must become no one. By the fourth night, her voice had changed. Lower, distant. When she spoke aloud, she heard echoes, not after, but before the sound. She caught herself standing in corners she had just left, wearing the bridal veil, silent, waiting. So she made a decision. She drew a circle of salt in the center of the altar room, placed the urn of her sister in the center, laid the mirror shard across her palm, and waited. Not for the ritual, not for the hour, but for the moment the mirror made its final offer. And it came. The mirror brightened, its surface no longer black, now silver, clean, empty. Yihru stood before it and saw herself fully, whole, the girl she remembered being. No ring, No blood, no weight of inheritance, just Yihru, the life she could have lived. "You can step through," the mirror whispered. "You can forget all this. You were never meant to carry her fate. She was the offering, not you." Tears filled her eyes. The reflection smiled, opened her arms, welcoming, inviting. She reached out, touched the glass, and felt warmth. Real, human. The life she lost was right there, a step away. But then, something moved at her feet, a sound. The urn. It rattled, split open, and a small handprint in ash spread across the floor. A memory returned of her mother sobbing, of whispering over the stillborn child, "Forgive me." And then Yihru remembered something the mirror had hidden. A lullaby, one only her mother sang when she thought no one heard. One twin for the river, one twin for the sun, one to remember, one to be undone. Yihru stepped back, closed her hand, and whispered her name. Not the one the mirror gave her, not the one her reflection wore, her real name. "I am Lin Yushu." The mirror screamed. Cracks shot through its surface. She ran to the altar, lit the final candle, drew blood from her palm and poured it over the ashes. The mirror flared, flickered, burned, and she raised the old shard, held it like a blade, and turned to face herself. One of them would not leave this room.
The mirror was breaking, but so was she. Lin Yuru knelt at the altar, blood still warm in her palm, ashes scattered across the floor like spilled memory. The mirror's surface no longer held a shape. It warped and twisted, flashes of light and shadow bleeding into one another. For a moment, she thought she saw her mother again, kneeling in front of the mirror, sobbing, clutching something wrapped in red silk. Then, another figure, a baby, still, pale, her twin. But then, the scene shifted, and the baby opened its eyes. Lin Yuru gasped. The mirror showed her a memory that had never belonged to her. Or maybe it had. It was hard to tell now. She was in a cold, wet room, a birthing chamber deep within the village temple. Her mother screamed in labor. 2 midwives stood at her sides, hands covered in blood and river clay. The first baby came quickly, silent, unmoving. The second screamed. But the scream wasn't one of life. It was rage. The midwife hesitated, then wrapped the first child in red silk. Yihru recognized the woman, the midwife who had given her the mirror shard. But the name spoken over the first child was Yukshu, her name. Yet it had been given to the stillborn twin. The second child, the one who lived, was never named, only hidden, raised in silence, wrapped in another's life. She staggered back from the mirror. I'm not... The walls spun. The altar candles flickered. The journal, her mother's journal, lay open on the floor. But now it was different, more pages than before. She picked it up, read through shaking hands. The first child died before the breath came. I named her Yukshu as promised. The second one came screaming, alive, but wrong. The wrong one lived. I couldn't give her to the mirror. She wasn't meant to be the offering. But I lied. I gave her the name.
I made her live a life not hers. The mirror knows. It always knew. But it waited until she believed the lie too. Lin Yiru dropped the journal. Everything, her name, her life, her memories, all borrowed. She had not been saved. She had been substituted. The mirror didn't want her reflection. It wanted to complete the wedding it was promised. To the girl who died, Yukshu, her twin. And now, both of them were here. The room darkened. Wind pressed through the boards, carrying the scent of river mud and bridal powder. The bone mirror pulsed, and from its cracked surface, a girl emerged. Small, pale, dressed in red silk. Her face was smooth, except for her eyes, which were empty. She said nothing, but in her hand she held a fragment of the wedding veil, torn and stained. She walked toward Yiru and placed it in her lap. Then she knelt, as if waiting for permission. Yiru stared down at her, this child that was and wasn't her. The twin, the one who was promised, the one who had never lived. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Then, from behind the child, the groom appeared, no longer faceless. Now he wore Yukshu's eyes and Yiru's mouth. He was not one spirit. He was both twins, bound together in grief and betrayal, shaped into something ancient and vengeful. He had not hunted Yiru out of error. He had hunted her because she was the only soul left that remembered. The bone mirror glowed brighter. A circle of fire traced the altar. The wedding was beginning again, not in ritual, but in echo. Every villager appeared in the flames, bowing, chanting, reenacting the wedding of a bride who had never walked the earth. The groom reached out. The child raised her arms, and Yiru realized the only way to end this was to give the soul a choice. She stepped forward, between them, kneeling. Her voice was calm. You don't have to marry him. You don't have to take the name. You don't have to be me. The child blinked. A tear, black as ink, slid down her cheek. Yiru turned to the groom. You're not a spirit. You're the echo of guilt, of lies passed down, of names misused. I won't carry it anymore. She reached into her robe, pulled out the final item, the mirror shard from the Taoist, held it to her heart, and said, I give you my name. Let her go. The bone mirror cracked. Light poured from its center, light and screams and memory unraveling. The altar caught fire. The child vanished into smoke. The groom burst into ash. And Yiru fell to the ground. When she woke, the house was gone. The mirror was gone. Only the ashes of the altar remained, and the morning sun, real, golden, warm, filtered through the mist. She stood, alone, whole, but without a name, without a twin, without a reflection, just breath and freedom.
The village did not wake with her. Yiru stood among the ashes of her mother's home, barefoot, veilless, no longer afraid, but not untouched. The altar was gone, the mirror shattered, the groom dispersed, but not destroyed. Because the mirror itself was only part of the curse. The real binding lived in memory, in names, in blood. And memory doesn't die. It must be unwritten.
She returned to the shrine at the edge of the rice field, where Master Gao, the Taoist who once bound mirrors and severed souls, had vanished days ago. But he was not there. Only a scroll remained, sealed in wax, marked with her mother's name. She unrolled it slowly. The ink smelled like blood, and the words were not instructions. They were a confession. There is no true way to destroy the bone mirror, only to give it what it was promised. But if the promise was made in error, if the soul was substituted, then the reflection will always be wrong. To unbind the mirror, you must bind the truth. Burn the veil that was never worn. Scatter the ashes of the bride who was never kissed. Speak the name that was never hers, and look into the mirror with no face. Yiru read the lines again and again, until they were burned into her. She folded the scroll, returned to the ruins, and began preparing. She gathered the red bridal veil from the night of the crimson wedding. It still dripped with wax and old blood, but it was intact, folded in silence. She laid it on a stone slab and traced a circle around it with salt. Next, she opened the urn, the ashes of her twin, the sister who had never drawn breath, but who had carried the curse all the same. She poured the ashes carefully into a small brass bowl. Then she added something else, her name, written in her own blood, on a slip of rice paper, folded 3 times, placed atop the ash. And lastly, she brought the shard, the piece of the original mirror, the one that remembered all who had ever been bound. It pulsed softly now, as if waiting. The sun set for the last time. The final night had begun, and the drums returned, not in sound, in heartbeat. Her own. Ta-pong, ta-pong, ta-pong. She sat at the center of the ruined altar and lit 7 candles in a circle around her. Each flame flickered with a different hue, one for each generation of brides who had worn the red without a groom, one for each woman whose soul had been fed into the mirror. And she whispered their names, not just hers, all of them, the ones her mother never told her. And then, at the stroke of midnight, she did what no one had dared do before. She looked into the mirror again, not to see herself, but to unsee. Its surface rippled, and what came back was nothing. No reflection, no room, no flame, only emptiness. The space where memory dies. And from that void, a figure rose, the groom. But now he was no longer assembled from her face or her sister's. He was everything the mirror had stolen, every forgotten child, every silenced mother, every drowned bride. He stood naked in silence, stitched from red thread and prayer slips soaked in blood. His mouth did not move, but she heard him all the same. I was never meant to love. I was only made to wait. Yiru's voice cracked. I was never meant to be yours. You were never yours to begin with. She held up the veil. It trembled in her hands. Then she tore it, ripped the silk from top to bottom, The groom howled, not in pain, but in unraveling. He reached for her, but she scattered the ashes of her sister into the mirror. The surface froze, then flamed. The glass screamed. Cracks bloomed like flowers, and in the reflection, Yiru saw every version of herself begin to collapse. The child who stayed, the bride who ran, the girl who lied, the woman who forgot. Each one blinked once and turned to ash. The mirror caught fire, real fire. The Taoist shard turned to smoke in her hand. The scroll burned in her lap. The circle of candles melted into one endless stream of light. And the mirror, the bone mirror, finally shattered. Not with a scream, but with a sigh. Like memory exhaling. Like something releasing its hold. When she opened her eyes, the village was gone. Not destroyed, just gone. As if it had never been there. No altar, no river, no names. Just the quiet and the taste of salt on her lips. She touched her face. No veil, no ring, no reflection. She was unremembered, and she was free.
She thought it was over. The mirror had shattered, the altar had burned, the ashes had been scattered. But freedom is never clean, not when you've been remembered by the dead, not when your name still echoes beneath water. And that night, as Lin Yiru slept, the river called her home. It began with stillness, then with the sensation of breath leaving her lungs, not quickly, but gently, as if something was pulling it out, thread by thread. She opened her eyes. The room was gone. The house was gone. She stood beneath the sky, but it was wrong, upside down, moving like waves, dark and endless. And all around her, lanterns floated, hundreds of them, thousands, each one glowing red, their flames flickering in silence, casting her face back at her from every angle. But none of the reflections were her own. They were versions. She saw herself in bridal silk, in childhood braids, in mourning robes, in white, in blood, in bone. And when she tried to run, the water rose from beneath her feet, not to drown her, but to carry her under. She fell through the surface like it was a doorway. There was no splash, just the sound of silk unraveling. And then she was walking, not swimming, not sinking, walking through the river's bed, though no water pressed against her. Above her, the world drifted. Below her, the ground pulsed, alive, throbbing, breathing. The stones were carved with names. Some she knew, some she didn't. But one name repeated over and over again. Lin Yishu, her twin, the promised bride, the soul with no breath. And then the world opened into the drowned village. It was Yanshui, but inverted, submerged in silence. The buildings leaned inward as if whispering secrets to one another. The lanterns swayed against no current. The doors were open, but no one stood within. And in the center of the square, where the well once stood, a wedding altar waited. No groom, no bride, just a mirror. Unbroken, silver, endless. And beside it stood a woman, hair gray, hands weathered, eyes downcast. Her mother. "Suyin," Yiru whispered. The woman didn't turn. "You came back," she said, voice as soft as ash. "I had to," Yiru said. "You knew I would." Suyin nodded. "I waited here,
with her. She stepped aside, and there, kneeling in front of the mirror, was the child again, the twin, dressed in red, silent, still, her veil soaked in ink and water. "She doesn't know how to leave," Suyin whispered. "She only knows the name she was given." "You gave it to me," Yiru said. "You gave me her life." Suyin turned at last. Her face was lined with sorrow so deep it felt eternal. "I didn't know how to mourn the one who never lived, so I raised the one who shouldn't have. You should have told me. I was afraid the mirror would hear her." The mirror behind them pulsed, its surface warped, and the river beneath them began to boil. Suyin stepped back. "It's time." "For what?" "For you to decide who leaves." Yiru looked at the twin, then at her mother, then at herself. The ground split. From the crack, he emerged, the groom, faceless, formless, but full. This was not the stitched spirit from before. This was the river itself, its soul, its hunger. It spoke not in words, but in memory, projecting into Yiru's heart every moment the mirror had devoured. The women who drowned to escape their fate, the mothers who offered their daughters, the brides who said yes because saying no would damn them all, and one girl, Yishu, who never had a chance. "You were made from her silence," the river whispered. "You stole her voice." "I didn't know," Yiru said. "But you lived, yes. And you remembered, yes. Then what will you do now?" Yiru stepped forward, kneeling before the mirror. She turned to her twin, reached for her hand. It was warm now, soft, and the child lifted her eyes, not black, not hollow, but full of questions. Yiru placed her own hand beside hers, then pressed their palms against the mirror's surface, together. It rippled, once, twice, then split. And behind the mirror was no spirit, no ritual, only light. The river screamed, the altar cracked, Suyin vanished in a breath of smoke, and the twin stood on her own. She looked at Yiru, smiled, and stepped forward into the light. Yiru stayed behind, not because of punishment, but because of memory. Someone had to remain, to remember all the names, to bury all the broken weddings, to whisper to the river, "Not again." The bone mirror crumbled, and the drowned village sank for the last time.
The world was quiet. No whispers, no drums, no breath fogging glass. Just wind, gentle and clean. Lin Yiru opened her eyes beneath a sky she no longer recognized. It was pale, touched with gold, not the heavy gray haze of Yanshui's cursed mornings. She lay in tall grass on the edge of a riverbank, but the river was clear now. No more lanterns floated across its surface, no more names hid in the current. And for the first time since she returned, there were birds. She stood slowly. Her body felt heavier than before, but not tired, grounded. The silence around her was not hollow. It was full of absence, of what had been released, or maybe what had finally let go. Yiru walked back toward where the village used to be. There was nothing. No homes, no shrines, no temple ruins or cobblestone paths. Just reeds, just earth.
It was as though Yanshui had been gently erased, not with fire, not with violence, but with a kind of mourning that asked not to be seen. Even the air smelled new. She stood at the center of where the altar had once been and felt nothing. No fear, no presence, but not peace either. Just the space grief leaves behind. She reached into her pocket, half expecting the mirror shard to still be there. It wasn't. Only a thin line of ash remained. She let it fall through her fingers. It scattered in the breeze, unbound. Later, she wandered into a nearby town, not far from the mountain, a place with lights and noise and mirrors. She stepped into a public restroom, white tile, harsh light, stood before the sink, looked up, and saw herself. For a moment she froze. Her reflection blinked when she did, moved when she did, smiled softly. It was hers, but something had changed. Her eyes were deeper now, not haunted, just older, like they remembered someone else's sorrow and chose to carry it quietly. Back outside, a child ran past her, laughing, hair tied in red ribbon. She turned, watched the girl disappear into the crowd. She felt no fear, but her heart beat once, not loudly, just present. At the edge of town, in a second-hand store, she found a mirror. Old, carved frame, clouded in the corners. She stood before it and whispered, "Yushu?" No answer, only her reflection. Then a breeze passed through the room. Light shifted, and in the fogged lower corner of the mirror, just for a moment, a second handprint, small, faint, childlike. Then gone. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She simply bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you for leaving first." That night, she stayed in a quiet guest house. No altar, no candlelight, just a single mirror on the wall. She didn't cover it. She let it watch. And as she drifted into sleep, a dream returned, not of the groom, not of the drowned village, but of her mother brushing her hair beside a window, singing, softly. One twin for the river, one twin for the sun, one to remember, one to be undone. When she woke, there was no veil, no ring, but one word burned into her mind: remember. Because the mirror was never evil, it was never hungry, it only held what people gave it: lies, silence, sorrow, and sometimes names no one else remembered. Yiru walked to the river one last time, kneeled at the edge, and said her sister's name, not aloud, but with meaning. Then she stood, turned, and walked forward into a life that was only hers. But somewhere far away, in a room no longer marked, beneath a floorboard no longer there, a single shard of silver glass pulsed once, then went still, because even shattered, the mirror remembers, and always will.